I don't know if y'all experienced what I just experienced, but whoo, in that last song, when we hit that bridge a second time, we had a little swing going on, the toms. Nick was killing it. Amy was busting out the organ. There were some people raising their hands. There was some swaying. There was some shouting. Like church almost broke out at Mosaic. That was exciting, wasn't it? One day church is going to break out. It's going to be great. Oh, man, I tell you what, that song, it's good. And I love the way that Renaud talked about it last week. We sang that right before the message last week. And you know, sometimes I sought the Lord, he heard and he answered. Feels so true to our felt experience. And sometimes it feels distant. Sometimes it feels the opposite of true. And so what does it look like to have faith when God feels near and when he feels far away? And we talked about that last week, and I think that's so important. If you weren't here, if you didn't get to listen, I encourage you to go podcast it. This week, the author of Hebrews talks about the juxtaposition of faith and fear, which is huge. Fear for me, when I think about it, I think about a sunfish sailboat. Anyone else think of that? I'm sure we all do. In case you don't know what that is, this is not me. It's not actual footage of me on sunfish. But when I was 5 years old, my parents, they were a part of a summer camp, so I just grew up at a camp. And so I'm 5 years old, my buddy is 6 years old, and then we've got a kid sitter with us who's probably 16 or 17 years old, and he wants to take us out on this sunfish. Now, I've never been mistaken for someone who's brave. Let's be honest. Just not, that's just not me, right? I'm not, people don't look at me and they're like, oh, you're like The Rock, that's not it. I'm not super brave. And back then as a kid, as 5 years old, I was not brave. So I did not want to do it. And so he had to convince me to go. And so finally I thought, okay, Eric, he's trustworthy. We'll go with him. But I said, you better not go fast. Now, I don't know how much you know about these tiny little boats with these gigantic sails. If you're on a lake and the wind picks up and you really let that sail out, you can get going. You can get going really fast. And so I get on the boat, got my life jacket fastened on, and I'm hanging on for dear life. And so we start going, and he starts letting it out. The breeze picks up. We start going, creating a wake. And I'm like, stop, slow down, stop. And I was like just screaming like a man, like just a man in the making as a kid at the top of my lungs. And he did not. In fact, he just let it out. And we just started flying. And I was terrified. And then he thought, you know what I want to do now? I want to just move that rudder and turn it on a dime. Yeah. I used to think before this incident that he was really wise and cool and brilliant, and I know better now. He makes movies now, so maybe he'll make a movie this one day. But here's the thing: he turned it, and we just completely flipped. Which normally it's fine. You're on the water, you kind of get thrown and skid a little bit. But if you're familiar with sailboats, particularly these, there are these things bolted on the boat called cleats that you can tie a boat up to a dock, right? And so you wrap around it and tie it up to the dock. Well, I was sitting apparently right next to one, and when it flipped, it hooked into the back two straps of my life vest, and so I go under with the boat. And I don't know what has happened, because first of all, I was just... my life flashed before my eyes. It was only 5 years, so that was not a lot. But I'm under the boat, like freaking out, because I'm trying to swim and get out. I didn't know what's going on. I couldn't move at all, and I'm just screaming. And I don't know how long I was under, but it seemed like an eternity, and I was just about out of air. And my buddy, who's 6 years old, not our babysitter, not Eric, but my buddy realizes I'm not anywhere to be found, takes off his life jacket, goes under, finds me, unhooks my life vest, brings me up, saves my life. It was incredible. And I did not sail on one of those again. Fear is such a powerful thing. I mean, the way that it works in our brain physiologically is as soon as there's some sort of stimulus that is negative and scary, your amygdala in your brain sparks up and says, danger, 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 danger. And it flushes your body with all of this stuff. And there's a number of physiological changes that happen. You start to breathe faster. Your blood pressure goes up. You get some adrenaline shot into your body. And the whole idea is that fear is a gift to help humans survive bear attacks, right? Or dog attacks, or I don't know, tiny little cat attacks. I don't know. But it's so that you can run really quickly, so you can fight and be ready, or flee or freeze. I'm a freezer. I found it out one time. It was awful. I was with my buddy and we were hanging out. I'm sorry, I didn't tell this at the 9, but I just have to. I was hanging out with my buddy and he left because he had to go do something, and I had to run and get in the shower and go to a meeting that I had, and my door is one of those doors that when you leave it, it just locks automatically. So I go into my room, I start to step into the shower, like I'm in the shower, and then I hear a knock on the door, and I'm like, oh my goodness, of course. My buddy was one of those guys who forgets stuff. I was like, obviously he forgot his keys, what an idiot. So I get out of the shower, and I walk into my room to put on my clothes to go get the door for him, and right as I open my door to my room, he jumps out and scares me because he never left. And I'm there, just nothing between me and him, and I just melt to the floor. Like that's the kind of guy the manly man that I am. All right, that's where I'm at. So fear has played a role in my life, right? Fear has played a big role in my life. In fact, what's so powerful about fear is you have this other part, not just your amygdala, but you have the hippocampus. And what the hippocampus does is it lets you know the context of this scary thing. So if you see a bear and you're terrified and you think, should I get up and run right now? Your hippocampus says, oh, it's just a movie. You're fine, right? You can get a little scared because it jumped out at you, but it's TV, it's a movie, it's not real. You don't have to run, right? And then it jumps up into your prefrontal cortex, particularly in the right side, your right prefrontal cortex, and that's where it hits your identity group. So once it gets there, and all this happens before you're actually aware of it. This is what's going on in your brain. And you decide how in my group, based on what I've seen in different instances of people going through situations like this, is how we live and act and react in these certain scenarios. So your identity group is important. Your hippocampus is important to kind of balance out the context of what's going on. And then your amygdala plays a big part. Now, all this just happens physiologically, and we don't have a lot of control over that. It just kind of happens, right? But fear can play a role over time. So you can develop fear that works subconsciously inside without you even knowing it, and you begin to make decisions based on that over time built up fear. And as I was thinking about it, I was just pondering and saying, man, how often am I still that kid who was terrified under that sailboat and make decisions based on that? How often am I still the kid who's terrified of, disappointing his parents? Or the kid who in junior high walked into the cafeteria and the cool table all stood up, pointed and laughed at him? How often am I the young adult in seminary who was in a group of people having a discussion about some deep theological things, and I realized I'm out of my depth, and people realize I didn't know what I was talking about? And so how often do I still not speak up in groups like that because I'm still that guy, right? Those fears play such a powerful role in the way that we live our life moving forward, right? And I'm guessing most of you can relate. You can understand. Like you've had some experience in the past or continued experiences where that has developed fear in you. And now, without even knowing it, you make decisions to engage or procrastinate, to pursue a relationship or avoid it. Based on your fear, based on your past, based on things that you don't even know that are going on. And faith plays a major role in contrast to fear. Now, if you haven't been here for a while, we're in a book called Hebrews in the Bible. It's a letter that was written to the early church about 2,000 years ago to a group of people that were likely a part of the Church of Rome for a minute and then got displaced somewhere else and now are living their lives. But it's during the time of Nero's rule, likely the latter part of his rule between 64 and 68 AD, where there's major persecution going on. I don't know how much you know about Nero, the emperor, and what he did to Christians, but it's awful. It's horrendous. It's heartbreaking, the things that he did. And so you have a group of people outside of Rome who, they're experiencing some persecution. Some of them have lost their homes. Some of them have been kicked out of their families. Some of them have lost their respect in the town square. Some of them have lost their livelihood. It's costing them something. And they are connected with the people living in Rome who are going through this awful persecution, and they're wondering, am I next? Am I gonna be the next one brought into the Colosseum? Am I gonna be the next one filleted at one of Nero's parties? Am I gonna be the next one crucified? And so there's a lot of fear going on, thinking, man, is following Jesus worth it? Because the future seems terrifying for those who do follow Jesus. It doesn't seem safe. What do I do? Do I represent Jesus? Do I display Jesus? Do I talk about Jesus? Or knowing that being one of those kind of people and associating myself with that kind of community, do I kind of hide and not really talk about my Christianity and just am like a secret CIA Christian and nobody knows? Or do I just go with the masses and blatantly disregard my faith and display someone who doesn't follow Jesus? No, I don't know him. I don't follow him. I'm not one of those anymore. It's a big question for people who are wrestling with this kind of fear. It's huge. And so the author of Hebrews writes to this. He's got such a shepherd's heart, and he cares for these people. He wants to encourage them and help them to know that, yes, following Jesus is absolutely worth it. It's worth it. Stand strong, hold fast, don't drift. Jesus is worth it. He's better and greater and more powerful than anything you're going to face. Follow Jesus. And so for 10 chapters, he continues to encourage them over and over, displaying that Jesus is better, he's greater, he's superior, he's more powerful. And then he says this big therefore. Now, here, in light of what Jesus has done, here's how I want you to respond. And he gives us 5 things. Therefore, draw near to Jesus authentically, as you are. Even if you've been a big failure, even if you've denied him, draw near to him. Don't put on a facade and pretend. Say, this is who I am. This is where I've been. This is what I've done. Jesus, help me. Draw near in authenticity. 2, hold fast to your confession of hope in Jesus. 3, provoke each other toward being people of love in action. 4, live in consistent, gathered community. We can't do this on our own. We need one another. And 5, encourage one another more and more because we need it, particularly in a time like this. And the question that would come out of this from this group of people would be like, great, how in the world are we supposed to do this? And his answer is by faith. By faith. That's how. By faith. And then he preempts all of his discussion about faith by saying, you are a people of faith. That's who you are. It's in your identity because Jesus, we'll find out in chapter 12, has authored their faith, right? He's authored it. You are a people of faith. And he's going to finish it. You are a people of faith. And so he gives us this definition of faith, and we continue to see it play out through the lives of so many different people, through Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph. You see faith playing out in their lives. And here's kind of the way that we've put together the definition of faith according to the author of Hebrews. That faith, as it relates to us, or I like to call it within the parentheses of Jesus authoring our faith and perfecting our faith, right? What happens in here? What do we do? Faith is a present action response. It's a response to Jesus authoring our faith. It's a response to his call on our lives, right? It's a present active response, present action response. Now, we, a couple weeks ago, looked at this progression of faith. right? He's talked about these people who speak in a certain way. And he says the way that they're able to speak and act in this way is because they're seeking a certain thing. And the reason that they're seeking something is because they're thinking something. And the reason they're thinking something is because they desire something. And so faith is something that God births in our heart. And that awakens the way that God has truly wired us to function, awakens those desires, uncovers them, stirs them, which begins to affect the way that we think, which affects the things that we're seeking, which affects the way that we speak and act, right? It's a present action response. And it's focused on, or it's centered on, or it trusts in an object of our faith. Who is the object of our faith? Jesus. Come on, I love it. Yes, it's getting good. Church is happening. Jesus is the object of our faith. And it's so much about fixing our eyes on Jesus and his strength and his power and his might and his perfectly finished work, death, resurrection, ascension, that is what we fix our eyes on, not about ourselves and the strength or amount of our faith. But it's not just centered on Jesus. It doesn't just trust in Jesus. It's supported, it's nourished by past evidence. Right, there are people who've gone before us. There are people in our community, and I have experience on my own that nourishes my faith. And it's supported by community. We're not doing this alone. We can't do it alone. We need each other. This is why it's so important that we continue to gather together. We don't forsake gathering together. And the action that I engage in, it's what I do that I believe will lead me to that future hope. Right? I could either trust Jesus, fix my eyes on Jesus, and walk in his footsteps, or I could do it differently. I could choose my own way, or I could choose the way of the world. I could choose the way that I think is going to give me the most safety, or the most security, the most power, the most popularity, the most wealth. Or I could do it according to Jesus' way. I could trust him even though in the present I don't necessarily see it. I look at the past evidence that has nourished my faith. I'm surrounded by a community that's encouraged me that way, and I walk in the footsteps of Jesus. That is faith according to the author of Hebrews. And then he gets into faith as it relates to fear. So if you will, if you have a Bible, grab your Bible. We're going to be in Hebrews chapter 11, and we're just going to read it together. Chapter 11, starting in verse 23. If you don't have a Bible, I promise to read it the best that I can. I find that I now have to read from a distance. I have joined the fraternity of the reading glasses, the fraternity of the elect, and it is great. I feel like I've gotten hazed a lot as a freshman to this class, but I will read it the best that I can. It says this, verse 23, by faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents, because they saw that the child was beautiful, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. He considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith, he left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. By faith, he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. Now let's look at this. There's a lot in here. Now it's important to understand we don't exist in the same context that the audience that first heard this lived in, right? We're not worried that the government might take our ability to worship Jesus together here, at least not in the near future. We're not worried that we're going to be killed for loving Jesus, for proclaiming Jesus, for singing about Jesus, for sharing our faith in Jesus. That's not our scenario. However, there are many people in this world where that is their circumstance. That is the life that they lived. I just read a week ago about 70 Christians who were killed for their faith in the Congo, like killed, martyred for their faith. And I think, whoa, that's terrifying. My heart was just broken for them. In our scenario, what we'll likely experience is some social difficulty. Right? Christian morality used to be looked up to as a better morality than people who didn't believe in Jesus. When I was growing up, even if people didn't agree with me, they were like, yeah, you're actually morally better than I am. Your way is, Jesus' way is. But it's changed. Christian morality is now looked down upon in our society. And so if you really represent and live out and talk about Christian morality, you're gonna get some pushback in our society. Right? There's probably some fear associated with posting certain things or saying certain things or wearing certain things, like living in this way. It's possible that in the future, I don't know what the future may hold, it's possible that in 5 years, 10, 20, 30 years, we may live in a very different situation. But right now, that's not where we're at. But I don't want to downplay the fear that we experience, because you can't compare fear, because it's a physiological thing that happens to you, right? And whether you're watching a scary movie or you're actually seeing a real bear in real life, like the amygdala, it picks up and it does something. And if you have, right, developed this fear over time, it is so powerful in shaping the way that you make decisions. So it's important that we understand what's going on. So here, let's look at this. There are a couple of things I think are going to be incredibly helpful for us. It says this, by faith, verse 23, by faith, Moses. So who is the faith attributed to right here? Moses. Now wait a second. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents. Well, whose faith was it? It was his parents' faith. So why in the world is the author identifying this faith with Moses? I think it's beautiful. If we go back to our definition of faith, it's nourished by what? Past evidence. So what is so brilliant here is he's showing that Moses' parents' faith action nourished Moses' faith, played a part in Moses' later faith actions. It's huge. We need each other. I need your faith actions to encourage my faith, to nourish my faith, and you need mine. We need each other. And he says they did this because they saw that the child was beautiful and they were not afraid of the king's edict. This is back when the Israelites were in enslavement in Egypt. And Pharaoh, the king, had issued this edict because he was afraid of the Israelites because they had multiplied. And so he put them into harsh slavery and they had to work, and it was just terrible conditions, but they still multiplied and increased. So he got even more afraid. And so he issued this edict that all the male children that are born to the Israelite women should be thrown into the Nile and drown. So this is the scenario that the parents are in. They had this baby boy, and it says they saw that he was beautiful. Now, the Greek word here is great. It's not just that, they were like every parent that looks at their kid that's, slimy and misshapen right out of birth and is like, oh, you're so beautiful. And everyone else is like, why don't we wait a week? Right? That's not what's going on. So this word, this Greek word, it's incredible. It could mean handsome or beautiful, but it also means like well-bred or superior in nature. Now, it's not like it's a better race of human. That's not what's going on. The author of Hebrews is hearkening back to what we see in Exodus, where Moses is directly compared to Noah. When his parents wanted to save him after hiding him, what did they put him in to go down the Nile? A basket, but the word there is the word, do you know? Ark. Yeah, it's the exact same word as the thing that Noah was in when he passed through the waters and was the deliverer of humanity. Now, his parents, what they saw in this baby was not just a beautiful image bearer of God, but they saw the potential of what God could do through this human to possibly deliver the people from their awful position that they lived in, right? So they had this faith in what God could do through an image bearer of him. And so they were willing to ignore the king's edict, hide him, and then put him in the basket, save him. Now, it says this, by faith, Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. Now, this word for grown up, it's the word megas, and it means, you could be gotten older, but it means to be great. So what's happening, and what the writer of Hebrews wants to draw our attention to, is Moses' dilemma. So Moses, by birth, was an Israelite or a Hebrew. But then when he got put into the river, Pharaoh's daughter adopted him, and he was raised as the grandson of Pharaoh. And Pharaoh, who was the king of Egypt, was likely at that time in the world the wealthiest, most powerful human being on the planet. Because 400 years earlier, Joseph had gotten his family incredibly wealthy, right? But now he's really wealthy and powerful. And so Moses, he's the grandson of Pharaoh that has power, prestige, wealth, honor, authority right there. But he's also the son of a Hebrew mom and dad. And this people is oppressed, mistreated, beaten. They're forced into slave labor. And it's like, what would you choose? What family would you identify with? And I think if I were Moses, I'd be like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to help my people from this position of power. Yeah, I'm a Hebrew. What are you? Hebrew. What was that? Like, that's kind of, that's where I think, right? Because it's like, which is better? And not just only which is better, but here, like, there's a lot of awful that comes with that. And so it says what he did is he refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He refused it. And then he chose rather to be mistreated with the people of God than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. See, what the author compares this to, all of this, is the fleeting pleasures of sin. That sin has some pleasures, but they're fleeting. They're momentary. They don't last. And I was like, how could I illustrate this? And I thought of all of these sins that I could do on stage for you. But instead, I thought that wouldn't go well. So I got some cotton candy. This is the fleeting pleasures of sin right here. It's gone. I mean, it was like a magic trick. I can't even talk now. It's like a magic trick, how fast that goes away, right? And it amounts to nothing. Like, that's what the fleeting pleasures of sin are like. There's enjoyment for a moment, there's pleasure for a moment, and then it's gone. And it gives no nutritional value. I might get a little sugar high for a second and, start to sound like Renault, and then I'm gonna crash, and I'm just gonna be like, let's take some deep breaths. You know what I mean? Like that's what's gonna happen. That's the fleeting pleasures of sin. That's the fleeting pleasures of sin. And Moses considered that this was fleeting and this was eternal, to identify himself with the Messiah. In fact, he said this, he considered the reproach of Christ greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt. All of the treasures, all of the power, all of the wealth, all of the notoriety, nothing in comparison to the treasures associated with God and his people. Not just here in the present, but in eternity. In eternity, because this life, no matter what it's like, it is momentary in comparison to eternity. These 40, 60, 100 years that I or you might live, it's a tiny dot, a tiny blip on the timeline of eternity. So no matter what the pleasures are, no matter how good or great they are fleeting in comparison to eternity and what all comes for those who follow and identify themselves with Jesus. And that's what Moses considered, for he was looking to the reward. He was looking to the reward. He had eyes fixed on the reward of what was gonna happen, what was gonna come, what God was gonna bring. That was his faith. He goes on, it says, by faith, he, Moses, left Egypt, not being afraid of the anger of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Now, there was twice when Moses left. The first time he fled out of fear, right? He was afraid he was gonna get killed. And so he fled into Midian and he was a shepherd for 40 years. And then he encounters God on Mount Sinai in a burning bush, and he goes back commissioned by God to lead the people out of slavery in Egypt. And they go out. And this time, he leaves in faith. This time, he leaves Egypt in faith. and faith in God and his power and his might, his majesty, his beauty. Even though there's still the fear of Pharaoh, right? Moses, I'm guessing, just like his parents, probably felt fear. It's not saying don't feel fear. It's not saying remove your amygdala so you just don't feel it, right? That's not what's being taught here. What's being taught is courage. Courage. I love the way that Matt Chandler defines courage. He's a pastor in Texas. He says this: courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the judgment that something else is more important than one's fear. Real courage takes place when you're anxious, when you are worried, when you just don't know how to push through. But then there's something more valuable, something greater than that fear. So though you feel fear, your actions are not driven by fear. They are directed by something else. You step out with courage because there's something else that drives you, something that is greater than what you're afraid of. I think about that sunfish sailboat. What would cause me to get on to one of those boats? It could be that there's something so beautiful and majestic and amazing to be seen that I could only get there on that sunfish, right? That could give me the courage to get on that, even though I'm afraid. Or there could be a volcano erupting on the land, and the only way to get away from it is that sailboat. I might even allow Eric to be the captain of that sailboat if I'm getting away from a volcano, right? So when you're comparing the fear of Pharaoh, or what happens to not be allegiant to God, to be an Egyptian and under the wrath of God, it's like okay, I get that, right? So it's not that you don't feel fear, it's what do you do when you feel fear? And a lot of it is, and I love this, we're getting this image of Moses between the parentheses, right? The parentheses of Jesus authoring and finishing our faith. Moses leaves in fear, flees in fear, and 40 years later, he leads the people in faith. And you think, what was going on in the midst of that? Well, at least part of it, he's spending time with God. He's hearing the voice of God. He's seeing the power of God. And his faith is being stirred in the midst of his fear. And Moses was pretty fearful. In fact, when God first commissions him, he gives 5 excuses. Well, 4 excuses. And the 5th time he says, I'm just not going to do it. Send someone else. And then God gets angry. And Moses is like, okay, I got it. Volcano, I'm ready. I'm in. Get in that sailboat. Now, it says, by faith, he kept the Passover and sprinkled the blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn might not touch them. The final plague, the 10th plague, was God saying, basically, Pharaoh, what you started years ago by killing all the boys in the Nile River, that's going to be visited upon you and all of Egypt. But anyone who sprinkles the blood over the doors, the blood of a lamb over the doorposts of their house, they'll be spared. So anyone who puts their hope, their trust, their faith in the blood of the lamb was spared. And Moses did. And you begin to think, okay, I know where the writer of Hebrews is going. I know what the author is getting at. He's saying, man, in the face of fear, how we, between the parentheses, become someone like Moses, from fearful and being owned by our fear, enslaved to our fear, making all of our decisions based on our fear, to people of courage who might still experience fear, but make decisions that are not owned by that fear. That we would, there's 5 things that I pulled from this passage. 5 things, by faith in the face of fear. Here's what it says. 1, see and value the divine beauty and potential in image bearers. We need to, as people of faith in Jesus, see and value the beauty and potential in image bearers of God. Secondly, we need to be people who are allowing the Spirit of God to help stir up in us the ability to consider the reproach of Jesus as surpassing value. That no matter what it costs us, it's surpassing value than all the treasures of the fleeting pleasures of sin. 3, look to the reward in identifying yourself with Jesus? What all comes with, yes, there's reproach for sure, but there's reward to be had. And the ultimate reward is being with Jesus himself, the fulfillment of all our desires. At his right hand, there's fullness of joy. At his right hand, there's pleasures forevermore. Right? This is the God who we get to be with. He is the reward. But it's not just that. What comes with Jesus is fullness of joy, right? Contentment, peace, life abundantly. No more pain, no more sickness, no more sadness, no more loss, no more hurt. Like looking to the reward. As we practice looking to the reward while we're in the parentheses of Jesus authoring and perfecting our faith grows, it strengthens. It's like faith training. 4, we persevere in looking at the invisible God. In chapter 12, the author of Hebrews will say, fixing our eyes on Jesus. As we practice fixing our eyes on Jesus, it does something to our faith within the parentheses. And 5thly, trust in the blood of the eternal Lamb to save. In that congregation of people reading this letter, there were people who had failed greatly, who had denied Jesus, who had rejected from all public understanding their faith in Jesus. And yet, he says, approach Jesus in authenticity. Trust in the perfect, finished work of Jesus. It's good for you. It's good for you back then. It's good for you today. It's going to be good for you tomorrow. No matter what you've done, no matter who you've hurt, no matter how you've lived, no matter what you've said, Jesus, his blood is good enough to strengthen our faith within the parentheses, right? He's not going to let us go. He is the object of our faith, and he is clinging on to us. So we continually trust over and over and over every time we fail in the perfect finished work of the eternal Lamb, that it was enough for us. And as we participate in these 5 things, what will happen in the parentheses, our faith will grow, our faith will strengthen, and we will become people, men and women, who one day, when it's gonna cost us a lot, and I don't know when that day is, I don't know what that's gonna look like, but one day, when it's gonna cost us a lot, we will, by God's grace, be able to, by faith, choose the reproach of Christ over all of the treasures of the most wealthy country in the world. What I think is so beautiful about this is God doesn't want us to have to be owned by fear. He gets it, he knows. He understands the way that fear works in the brain. And he knows how it works over time and how debilitating it can be, how overpowering it can be, how difficult it can be. And so he says, I want you to, by faith, live and train yourself, empowered by my Spirit, within the parentheses of me authoring and perfecting your faith, to become people of courage who can, in the midst of fear, make decisions that aren't based on our fear, but instead based on the object of our faith. So he surrounds us with community and says, you can't do this alone, but there are people with you. He gives us a trustworthy object of our faith, himself. He gives us past evidence to nourish it, to grow it, to help it grow and strengthen by all of the people who've gone before us, by all of the people who are with us, by all of our personal past experience. And he gives us over and over a glimpse of the future hope, the treasure, the reward waiting for Jesus followers that will last eternally. So that we, in his grace and kindness, can be people of courageous faith rather than people that are owned by our fear. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, God, we need you, we need you, we need you. Lord, fear is so powerful. It's so hard to work with sometimes. God, sometimes we don't even know it's there, and it's guiding our decisions. Lord, I pray, have mercy on us. Help us. Give us your grace and your kindness to be people who daily, in the small, tiny, little decisions, walk in faith, so that as fear becomes more difficult, more real, more tangible, we'd be able to continue to be people that, by faith, in community, live in spite of the fear, not according to it. I pray that you would encourage our hearts and our minds, that you'd draw us near to you. You'd fill us with your Spirit. You'd comfort us where we failed. You'd draw us near to your throne of grace, knowing that we can find help in a time of need. And we pray all of this in Jesus' name. Amen.